I'm still trying to figure out where exactly having 2 battle phases fits in the pie chart. Cimoooooooo! What's going on, guys? It's Cimoooooooo. Today I'm bringing to you my revised meta-analysis for the April 2017 format. A lot of events have transpired over the past weekend with the conclusion of YCS Denver, so I feel it's appropriate, now that we have the results from that event, that I modify the meta-analysis so you guys know what to expect if you've got a regionals or, you know, some larger tournament, something bigger than a locals. But even at your local level, this can be a very good gauge of what you might expect, you know, the more competitive meta players to be playing, so that you can best prepare yourself going into those tournaments. So, getting into the pie chart here, it looks, for the most part, compared to my original analysis, there's a lot of similarities, but there's also some differences as well. You can see some of the percentages have been tweaked. You see that primarily I have basically the same decks on here. There is one new addition, but other than that, the meta is kind of what I predicted it to be. You know, we've got, you know, Paleozoic, we've got Infernoids, we've got Zodiac, and we've got Metalfoes. And Metalfoes is something I really want to discuss in this video, more so than pretty much everything else, because I think it really took a lot of people by surprise that Metalfoes actually ended up taking 7 of the top 32 slots at YCS Denver. And so I really wanted to take some time to talk about why that possibly might be. Now, going into YCS Denver, you look at Metalfoes as a deck, and Metalfoes before Zodiac was even released was the best deck, and then Zodiac came out in Raging Tempest and pretty much just took the deck completely out of the format because people started maybe playing and toying with Metal Zoo variants, but then people quickly learned that the Zodiac deck just on its own was far superior, and Metalfoes Zodiac kind of fell by the wayside. And in my ignorance, I suppose, I guess I really underestimated the potential the deck had moving into the format. But now that we have a card like Balbaboon, which does so much for the deck in so many different ways, Balbaboon is able to fix Metalfoes' hands by placing the cards that they don't need on the bottom of the deck and giving them more draws, while also enabling the Zodiac combos that the deck is capable of doing. The deck also can play a 60 card or even a 50 card variant and doesn't really lose so much to consistency, because realistically, you can up the number of copies of Painful Decision, the number of copies of Summoner's Art, all these other cards that really 40-card Metalfoes builds don't really include. If you wanted to up your count to 50 or 60, you could really just add those cards in, and it really doesn't affect you that much, but it gives you a better matchup going into your 60-card matchups like 60-card Paleo, 60-card Infernoid, and things like that. And let's also not forget the fact that Metalfoes does have the Pendulum mechanic, which is still one of the most broken mechanics to date. I mean, any deck that's capable of just soul charging out an entire board every single turn is nothing to laugh at, because that can just single-handedly spell demise at any given point if the scales get completed. One other thing I think is really interesting about Metalfoes as well is that looking at this specific meta, Metalfoes doesn't really have a bad matchup. I mean, going up against Paleozoic, the deck doesn't really care too much about what Paleozoic has to do. Same thing goes for Infernoid. I mean, that's kind of one of the strengths that Infernoids has, is that it can banish the Rapiers and things like that. So I guess if you're playing a Metal Zoo variant, Infernoid can be kind of rough for your combos, but ultimately, you don't really care. The Zodiac combo in Metalfoes is just a bonus. And then you have your Zodiac matchup, which, again, you know, Metalfoes is very capable of playing through a lot of different back row because of the deck's flexibility and adaptability depending on what happens. Now, obviously, if the deck is hit by a Solemn Strike on the Pendulum Summon, that can pretty much just end the game for that deck right there. So the deck does have weaknesses, of course, but when you look at how the deck can function and how the deck can actually play around a card like Dimensional Barrier fairly well, because it can very easily shift from Fusion Summoning to Xyz Summoning for the Zodiac combos and things like that, or maybe Utopia the Lightning, and then also Pendulum Summoning. So even if your Zodiac combo gets locked out as a Metal Zoo player, you can just easily know that, okay, I can just Pendulum Summon freely now, assuming there's no Solemn Strike or anything like that, and that's how you're going to generate your advantage that your opponent has to work through. And then you have Fusion Summoning on top of that to just get your Mithriliums, your Alkahest. You got Aura Calc for double piercing. The deck is still very, very strong, and I definitely think I underestimated that going into the format. But not just myself, I think a lot of people really underestimated it. And it's interesting to me because at YCS Denver, so many people were siding for Paleozoic, but people still were siding for the Metalfoes matchup because in nearly almost every side deck I saw, people still had 2 to 3 copies of Anti-Spell Fragrance just in case they happen to run into their Metalfoes Zodiac matchup. Now, I know you can side Anti-Spell for, like, grass decks as well, because it pretty much makes half of their cards get turned off for a turn, but primarily, if you're going to have Anti-Spell Fragrance, it's for the Pendulum matchup, because it just shuts down the mechanic altogether, and that's ideally what you want to use it for. So, I found it really interesting that even with Anti-Spell being heavily represented in the side deck, Metalfoes Zodiac still did incredibly well, and that just goes to show that if you make the correct meta call, which I think for YCS Denver, it looks like Metalfoes Zodiac was the correct meta call. I mean, that was very good for the players that decided to pilot that deck. So moving on, I have Paleozoic and I have Zodiac kind of taking the top half of the pie chart here, and then with Infernoid and Metalfoes Zodiac just falling slightly behind, because I do still definitely think that 60 card Paleozoic as well as Zodiac are still arguably the best decks that you're going to be going up against this format. The fact that pure Zodiac had 11 tops in the top 32 of YCS Denver is absolutely crazy. And this is with people main decking 3 copies of DD Crow and all these other crazy things. Like, people were main decking Flying Sea and all these other crazy cards in an attempt to slow Zodiac down, yet it still took 11 of the top 32, and it might not have won the event, although Infernoid inevitably did. It's still the best represented deck, and just because a deck doesn't win the event doesn't mean it's not the best deck. Typically, the deck that's the most represented is arguably the best deck, because that means the most players got that far with the deck. And then again, Paleozoic really had a shortcoming because it only had 3 at tops, I believe, in the top 32, but that's because people were siding so heavily for the deck. You had people running triple Denko Sekka, you had people running Royal Decrees, you had the DD Crow in the main deck also really hurts that deck tremendously as well. So people were really prepared for this matchup, as I've already discussed in previous videos. So that really hurt the deck, but that doesn't mean the deck is bad by any means. The deck is still incredibly powerful, and under the right circumstances, maybe now that people see that Zodiac and Metalfoes got the most tops, they might shift their strategy to their side decks accordingly, thinking they might not have to worry about Paleo, and then Paleo's going to come back out of nowhere, maybe at YCS Pittsburgh, and then just blow out and take another YCS victory. I also do want to discuss Zombie Lightsworn, because Zombie Lightsworn also had 3 decks in the top 32 as well, and while that may not seem like a lot, that is a fair amount of spots to take in the top 32, and what's cool about Zombie Lightsworn is that, especially thanks to a card like That Grass Looks Greener, you don't need a card like Minerva to actually play Zombie Lightsworn. Sure, having a Minerva helps if you can afford it, but the deck has so many ridiculously insane combos. You've got 2-card double Omega combos, and you can just play through so many different types of boards. Again, another deck that's not really susceptible to Dimensional Barrier because you've got Synchro and Xyz plays to deal with. And if you just draw a card like Grass, I mean, you are just in the fucking clear. So I'm really happy to see this deck do well because I think it's a really awesome deck. It has so many cool combos, and it's a really powerful deck overall, and is something that really should not be overlooked, because if you go up against it and you're not prepared, then this deck could totally just overwhelm you and you will have no chance. Last but not least, I do want to discuss Wind Witch Invoked Artifact, because a couple of you guys in the comments mentioned that I did forget it and leave it out. And The interesting thing about Witch Invoked Artifact is that it hasn't really been performing as well as I think a lot of people think and or want it to, and I think that's mainly attributed to the fact that now that Zodiac has kind of taken a step down and isn't overwhelmingly destroying the meta, I feel like Witch Invoked Artifact was a very strong counter anti-meta pick for the Zodiac matchup, especially the pure Zodiac or even the Kaiju Zodiac matchup specifically. But the thing is, it did get one top at YCS Denver, which is notable, and there was, I'm sure, plenty of people playing the deck, but at the same time, you do have to keep in mind that Witch Invoked Artifact is more of a counter anti-meta strategy than an actual meta strategy, because it's very difficult to see a meta comprised of Witch Invoked Artifact, in my opinion. I feel the deck is a little bit clunky in the way that it functions. I mean, it has very powerful plays like Crystal Wing, locking people out with Scythe, you've got the Invoked engine with Makaba and Raijin, and all these other really cool plays, but it doesn't really come together, if that makes sense. The deck kind of just has a lot of really powerful cards that are good at stopping other powerful decks, but doesn't really have, I guess, that really, there's not really like a centerpiece to really bring the deck all together. It's a very cool control deck, and if you really are a fan of control decks, I'd highly recommend checking it out. But this is a deck that you might see some players play, but I wouldn't expect to see it in every single round at a regional or a YCS. But it is definitely worth mentioning because the deck is powerful enough that you're going to see it in some form or another. So guys, that's going to do it for the revised April 2017 meta analysis. We got dinosaurs coming out as well, and like I said, dinosaurs are a very powerful deck as well, but you're not going to see dinosaurs really shine until Maximum Crisis in May when the True Kings come out, and I'll definitely be talking about that more in the May meta analysis. But guys, that's going to be it. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think about the remaining April 2017 format. I would really like to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always, subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content, and also be sure to back me on Patreon, because just by pledging $1 a month, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.